Gefreiter Hinrich Seal, a machine gunner of the German 352nd Infantry Division, sat inside his reinforced concrete bunker, one of the key nodes in the defensive network overlooking the approaches to Omaha Beach. In front of him lay his MG-42, the weapon the Wehrmacht regarded as the pinnacle of infantry firepower. Seal meticulously cleaned the barrel, performing the well-rehearsed maintenance routine he had practiced countless times before. His movements were calm, disciplined, almost ritualistic, yet the silence around him gave no indication of the unimaginable volume of fire this same weapon would unleash within a matter of hours. In the breast pocket of his tunic, he carried a folded letter from his girlfriend in Metzingen, a simple message of affection and reassurance, promising to wait for him until the war had reached its victorious conclusion. Only 3 days earlier, Seal had responded to her with confident, even boastful words. After a personal inspection of the sector by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the so-called Desert Fox, Seal had written, "The invasion will be their grave. We will throw them back into the sea within hours." Rommel had examined the firing slits and the overlapping kill zones of WN-62 with clinical precision. Standing behind Seal's gun aperture, he surveyed the interlocking fields of fire stretching across the tidal flats and nodded with visible satisfaction. "When they come," Rommel said, "this beach will be their cemetery." Through the embrasure, Seal saw nothing but darkness over the English Channel. The sea was calm, the night almost serene. No engine noise, no silhouettes, no signs of movement. For a defender trained to expect an invasion for months, the stillness seemed almost deceptive. In just 12 hours, this same young man would be found sobbing uncontrollably inside the ruins of his bunker, surrounded by more than 13,500 empty shell casings. His MG-42 barrel would be warped from heat, his vision blurred from exhaustion, and his mind numbed by the sight of an invasion force so vast that his brain struggled to even categorize what his eyes had witnessed. Seal would later claim he had inflicted 1,000 to 2,000 casualties. Historians consider such numbers impossible, given that total American casualties on Omaha Beach, from all causes combined, were approximately 2,400. His exaggeration, however, reveals something deeper. The scale of the assault overwhelmed the perceptions of those who faced it. The mathematics of German defeat on D-Day would not be written in strategic reports, but in the shocked testimonies of frontline soldiers who witnessed the largest amphibious invasion in human history from the wrong end of the gun barrel. The Atlantic Wall itself, stretching 2,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border, was portrayed by German propaganda as the most formidable defensive line ever constructed. Along the Normandy coast, 58 divisions of varying quality manned fortifications built with 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel. Hitler personally declared the line impregnable. Nowhere did the defenses appear more intimidating than at Omaha Beach. According to the U.S. Army Center of Military History, the Germans had established 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery positions, 18 anti-tank gun emplacements, 45 rocket launcher sites, 85 machine gun nests, 6 mortar pits. The beachfront itself was transformed into a massive killing ground. Engineers had placed 3,700 obstacles in the tidal zone, Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, timber stakes often topped with Teller mines. Behind them, fields of mines stretched inland. While Rommel had demanded 60 million mines for the Atlantic Wall, only 6.5 million were ultimately laid, still an enormous number by any standard. Colonel Ernst Goth, commander of the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux, calculated the theoretical weight of fire his sector could produce. His 4 artillery batteries alone could deliver up to 120 rounds per minute into the landing zones. Combined with neighboring units, the German defenses could theoretically saturate any assault with overwhelming fire. But all these calculations assumed one thing that would prove disastrously false: an unlimited supply of ammunition. June 5th had brought weather that seemed to guarantee the postponement of any Allied assault. Walter Stuber, Luftwaffe meteorologist stationed in Paris, reviewed atmospheric readings taken from U-boat patrols and coastal weather stations. His conclusion was delivered with absolute confidence. High winds, rough seas, and low cloud ceilings made a cross-channel invasion impossible for at least 2 weeks. Wind speeds reached 20 to 25 knots, waves climbed above 6 feet, and cloud cover hovered near 500 feet. The German High Command accepted this forecast without question. It aligned with their own expectations. They believed the Allies would require ideal conditions to launch a seaborne assault of unprecedented scale. Thus, Stübe's report, though ultimately disastrously wrong, fit neatly within the assumptions of an overconfident military establishment. In light of the forecast, key German officers relaxed their vigilance. Rommel himself departed his headquarters on June 5th, returning to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. He carried with him a pair of soft grey suede shoes he had purchased for her in Paris. General Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, ordered senior officers to attend war games in Rennes. Naval patrols were cancelled due to the heavy seas. The Wehrmacht, unaware of the Allied meteorological superiority, essentially concluded that nature itself was guarding the Channel. This meteorological miscalculation was the first in a long chain of German errors. Unbeknownst to Stübe, the Allies possessed weather data unavailable to the Germans, observations from weather stations in Greenland and high-altitude reconnaissance flights over the Atlantic. These revealed a narrow, temporary break in the storm. A 36-hour operational window that Group Captain James Stagg identified and presented to Eisenhower. After intense debate, Eisenhower seized the opportunity. At 23:15 on June 5th, radar stations along the Normandy coast began detecting unusual activity. Freya and Würzburg radar sets picked up massive aerial formations approaching from the north. Yet, radar operators had seen such activity before. Allied deception raids intended to keep German forces restless and uncertain. The German command, conditioned by months of feints and diversionary actions, dismissed the reports. By 0030 hours on June 6th, however, the situation no longer fit any known pattern. Reports from across Normandy described paratroopers landing behind German lines, but the descriptions were contradictory and confusing. Some claimed the troops were British, others insisted they were American. Some reported landings far to the east, others far to the west. Unknown to the Germans, Allied special units were dropping thousands of dummy paratroopers equipped with firecrackers and noisemakers, part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, intended to sow chaos and obscure the real airborne landings. One of the first German officers to grasp the gravity of the unfolding situation was Major Hans von Luck of the 21st Panzer Division. Awakened by reports of parachute landings near his positions, he immediately requested permission to counterattack. The answer he received from higher headquarters reflected the paralysis of German command doctrine: do not move until the situation clarifies. Von Luck later wrote in his memoir, Panzer Commander, "At that moment, I knew we were lost. The paratroopers were clearly marking the flanks for a seaborne landing. Every minute we waited gave them time to consolidate. Yet we sat immobile, restrained by our own command structure." By 5:30, as the first light began to break across the Channel, German observers in forward positions reported something without precedent in their military experience. Some accounts, though disputed, credit Oberleutnant Werner Pluskat of the 352nd Division with being among the first to report the approaching armada. Even if Pluskat's role remains uncertain, what is beyond dispute is that German lookouts from multiple sectors described the same astonishing sight. From horizon to horizon, the sea was covered with ships, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. A grey mass stretching across the Channel, moving steadily toward the French coast. The Allied fleet consisted of 6,939 vessels, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 ancillary vessels, 864 merchant ships. It was, according to Allied naval records, the largest armada ever assembled in human history. To the German defenders, conditioned for years by propaganda about the supposed weakness and disunity of the Western Allies, the psychological shock was immediate and profound. Bernhard Fürking, an artillery officer at WN-62, who would be killed later that morning, reportedly told his men, "The whole world is coming." At 05:35, the shelling began. Nothing in the German experience, neither the Eastern Front nor the heaviest RAF bombing raids, had prepared them for the naval barrage that opened the assault. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells at Point du Hoc in just 34 minutes. HMS Warspite, the first ship to open fire on D-Day around 05, delivered more than 300 15-inch shells over the following days. German veterans later recalled in statements collected by the Bundesarchiv that supposedly indestructible concrete fortifications cracked under the relentless bombardment. Men were buried alive, dug out, and buried again as shells continued to fall. The psychological impact was catastrophic. Positions they believed impregnable were disintegrating like sand under a rising tide. As the naval fire intensified, the Luftwaffe attempted to muster a response. The effort revealed the extent of German collapse in the air war. Oberst Joseph Pips Priller, commander of Jagdgeschwader 26, was ordered to attack the invasion fleet with his entire force. His reply, recorded in the unit's war diary, was bleak. "What entire force? I have 2 aircraft." On D-Day, the Luftwaffe managed just 319 sorties against 14,674 Allied sorties. Priller and his wingman, Unteroffizier Heinz Wodarczyk, conducted the only known German air attack on the beaches that morning, making a single strafing run over Sword Beach before fleeing from overwhelming Allied air cover. This lone attack, executed by 2 pilots against an invasion fleet of thousands, became a symbol of the Luftwaffe's impotence, an extraordinary contrast to years of propaganda promising air supremacy. At 6:30 hours, the first American assault waves approached Omaha Beach. Despite the relentless naval bombardment, many German defensive positions, including WN-62, remained operational. As the landing craft dropped their ramps, German machine gunners, riflemen, and gunners opened fire with a level of intensity unmatched on any other Allied beach that day. Hinrich Seal, positioned at one of the rare bunkers that had survived the naval shelling intact, began firing at approximately 06:35. From his elevated position, his MG-42 commanded nearly unobstructed arcs of fire across the beach's most critical approach lanes. In a post-war memoir published in 2005, WN-62, Erinnerungen an Omaha Beach, Seal described firing approximately 13,500 rounds over the course of 9 hours. His claims of inflicting 1,000 to 2,000 casualties have long been dismissed as impossible by military historians, but not because his fire was ineffective. Rather, the total American casualties on Omaha Beach, from all sources combined, were around 2,400. No single machine gunner could have been responsible for even a fraction of Seal's estimates. Yet his exaggerated recollections reveal an essential truth about the psychological shock experienced by German defenders. The sheer mass of the Allied assault created the impression of endless, uncountable waves of enemies. Seal's MG-42, firing at a rate of up to 1,200 rounds per minute in controlled bursts, became one of the instruments of what the Americans would later call Bloody Omaha. His experience mirrored that of countless German gunners who found themselves confronting an invading force that appeared, in their own words, limitless. This overwhelming perception led to what modern military historians describe as material shock, the mental breakdown experienced when soldiers face an enemy with apparently infinite manpower, firepower, and logistical reserves. No matter how many Allied soldiers fell, more emerged from the landing craft. Every landing craft destroyed by German fire was replaced by several others. Naval gunfire suppressed German machine guns with precision and persistence never before seen in warfare. By midday, German reports from across the Omaha sector described worsening ammunition shortages. The fire plans had been calculated based on repelling a limited assault. No German commander had imagined an attack of this magnitude. Supply logs from Wehrmacht archives reveal that many positions expended their allotted ammunition for a 3-day battle in just a few hours. Artillery batteries faced similar crises. Ammunition stocks, carefully rationed and tightly controlled, evaporated under the demands of the fighting. Attempts to move reserve stocks toward the beaches failed completely. Allied fighter bombers roamed the skies unchallenged, turning every German road, bridge, and rail line into a death trap. The contrast with Allied firepower could not have been more extreme. German observers reported that American destroyers would fire hundreds of shells at a single strongpoint, adjusting fire rapidly based on signals from forward observers or from aircraft. By the afternoon of June 6th, some German artillery units were rationed to 4 shells per gun per day, a catastrophic limitation in the face of overwhelming Allied pressure. The paralyzing delay of the German armoured response. During these critical early hours, the German Armoured Reserve, the very force Rommel had insisted must strike the Allies at the beaches, remained paralysed. The 21st Panzer Division, the only substantial armoured formation close enough to influence the outcome at Omaha and Sword, received no orders to attack until 10 hours, 4 hours after the landings had begun. This delay proved fatal. By the time the 21st Panzer Division finally advanced at 1620, the situation had radically changed. The division's tanks, half-tracks, and panzer grenadiers moved between the drop zones of British airborne forces and the beaches. By approximately 1900, elements of the division reached the coast between Lyon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer, the only German armoured formation to reach the shoreline on D-Day. Then, just 2 hours later, at roughly 2100, the Germans witnessed the arrival of an airborne reinforcement wave that would become known as Operation Mallard. 250 British gliders descended onto landing zones east of the Orne River, bringing artillery, anti-tank guns, vehicles and infantry to support the British 6th Airborne Division. The glider armada appeared so massive that the panzer commanders believed their flanks were about to be enveloped. Fearing encirclement, the 21st Panzer Division withdrew. The division suffered the loss of 54 tanks and armoured vehicles in the day's fighting, approximately 25% of its strength, without ever launching a coordinated counterattack against the beaches. Hobart's funnies, a new era of armoured warfare. As the German armour probed the Allied lines, they encountered a type of vehicle entirely unfamiliar to them. The specialised armoured machines designed by Major General Percy Hobart of the British 79th Armoured Division. These unusual vehicles, nicknamed Hobart's Funnies, included mine-clearing flail tanks, armoured bulldozers, bridge-laying tanks, flamethrower tanks, demolition vehicles. To German soldiers trained in traditional armoured doctrine, these machines appeared almost anachronistic, like weapons from a different era or a different kind of war entirely. Their presence demonstrated the degree of Allied engineering innovation and specialisation, something the Wehrmacht, already stretched thin, could not hope to match. Airborne forces behind German lines. Throughout June 6th, German units faced a threat for which they were wholly unprepared, massive Allied airborne forces operating behind their defensive lines. The 6th British Airborne Division, along with the US 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, created chaos and uncertainty far beyond their actual numbers. General Major Friedrich von der Heydt, one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced paratroop commanders, summarized the situation in post-war interviews. The Allied airborne operation was everything ours had never been: massive, coordinated and consistently supplied. We dropped battalions, they dropped divisions. We were supplied by single aircraft, they had endless streams of gliders and transport planes. The psychological effect was enormous. German units refused to move, fearing ambush by paratroopers. Others fired at shadows or shot at their own men in confusion. The airborne operations multiplied German problems exponentially, paralyzing the ability to form coherent counterattacks. As D-Day progressed beyond the chaotic morning hours, the German command structure began to unravel at an alarming rate. The enemy they faced, an Allied coalition capable of coordinating naval, airborne and ground operations on an unprecedented scale, overwhelmed every assumption on which the German defence of France had been built. Collapse of German command and control. German communications began to disintegrate rapidly. Allied aircraft attacked with devastating precision, hitting road junctions, headquarters, communication hubs and supply convoys. French resistance units, activated by coded BBC messages broadcast in the days before the invasion, sabotaged telephone lines, cut rail tracks and destroyed relay stations. Radio communication, already limited by German equipment shortages, was heavily disrupted by Allied electronic warfare units who jammed frequencies and flooded channels with interference. General Lieutenant Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, attempted to coordinate a coherent defensive response from his headquarters at Le Mans. But his war diary conveys increasing helplessness. By noon, 2/3 of the divisions under his command had simply disappeared from the communication network. Entire regiments were operating without any contact with higher command. Orders could not be transmitted. Situational awareness vanished. Commanders acted in isolation, often on outdated or completely inaccurate information. The paralysis was total. By the evening of June 6th, what had once been presented as the impregnable Atlantic Wall no longer existed as a coherent defensive system. The wall had been breached at multiple points. Allied beachheads, supported by a continuous stream of reinforcements, were expanding inland. German counterattacks were fragmented, uncoordinated, and repeatedly crushed by Allied air power. The Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine on the brink of collapse. As ground forces struggled to reorganize, both the Luftwaffe and the Kriegsmarine attempted to intervene. Their actions only underscored the disaster unfolding across Normandy. The Kriegsmarine, heavily outmatched, managed to sink a single American destroyer, the USS Corey. In the process, it lost 15 E-boats and numerous smaller craft. The Luftwaffe, already stretched to its limits by years of attritional warfare, had almost nothing to deploy. The promised German air superiority was revealed to be an illusion. What little the Luftwaffe could muster was swept aside by Allied fighters, bombers, and anti-aircraft defenses. German soldiers on the ground repeatedly reported that the skies belonged entirely to the Allies. The ground situation deteriorates. By late evening, reports from German units along the front exposed the scale of the disaster. Generalleutnant Wilhelm Richter, commander of the 716th Infantry Division, which bore the brunt of the British landings on Sword, Juno, and Gold, submitted a devastating situation report. Division combat strength, approximately 35%. All coastal strongpoints lost, artillery, 90% destroyed enemy forces advancing inland at multiple sectors. The numbers stripped away any remaining illusions. Despite scattered acts of extraordinary bravery, the German defensive system was collapsing under the pressure of overwhelming Allied strength. The invasion the Germans had vowed to repel within hours had instead broken through their lines by nightfall. Night actions. German counterattacks turn into annihilation. Throughout the night of June 6th-7th, German units attempted to regroup and launch counterattacks. But each attempt revealed the true extent of Allied supremacy. Major von Luck's panzer grenadiers, delayed for hours by contradictory orders, finally attempted a night advance towards Sword Beach. In his memoirs, von Luck described what followed. It was as if the night had turned into day. Parachute flares illuminated us completely. The destroyers at sea fired with perfect accuracy. Every movement was observed, every vehicle targeted. We lost half our strength without seeing a single enemy soldier. Allied dominance was absolute. Any German movement, whether infantry, armor, or supply, was immediately detected and engaged by artillery, naval gunfire, or fighter bombers. The Germans were fighting blind, deaf, and immobilized. The Allies had complete control over the battlefield. Allied logistics begin to overwhelm the defenders. While German units were being shredded before they could coordinate an effective response, the Allied logistical machine was beginning to function with astonishing efficiency. The first components of the Mulberry artificial harbours were already being positioned. These massive portable structures allowed the Allies to unload tanks, trucks, artillery, and supplies even in the absence of a major port. Supply ships formed orderly rows offshore, delivering men and material at a rate that far exceeded German expectations. Within days, the Allies were landing 15,000 tons of supplies per day, more than the entire German 7th Army consumed in a week. German units, conversely, found themselves cut off from reinforcements. Every railway line was bombed. Roads were cratered or blocked by destroyed vehicles. Bridges had been systematically targeted for months. According to Wehrmacht transportation records, units that should have reached Normandy in one day took between 10 days and 2 weeks. Some never arrived at all. A striking example is the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse. The division took 17 days to reach the front, a journey that should have required 3 days. Along the way, it lost 30% of its vehicles to Allied air attacks without ever engaging a single Allied soldier. The psychological effect on German troops was devastating. If they could not even reach the battlefield intact, how could they hope to influence it once they arrived? By June 7th, it had become clear that the German forces in Normandy were no longer facing a mere beach assault. They were confronting a sustained industrial-scale invasion supported by logistical capabilities far beyond anything they had anticipated. The Wehrmacht, accustomed to lightning offensives and rapid maneuver, found itself locked into a grinding defensive struggle it was neither equipped nor supplied to fight. German casualties mount. Reinforcements failed to arrive between June 7th and June 12th. German forces across the Normandy front found themselves under relentless pressure. The Allied foothold expanded each day, supplied continuously by a logistical network that functioned with extraordinary efficiency. Every hour, fresh Allied troops, tanks, artillery pieces, and supplies poured ashore. The Mulberry harbours, once fully operational, enabled the sort of sustained build-up that made German resistance increasingly futile. German casualties during these days mounted at a staggering rate. By June 12th, Wehrmacht forces in Normandy had suffered approximately 26,000 casualties, killed, wounded, or missing, the equivalent of losing 2 full-strength divisions. Replacements were minimal and poorly equipped. Many were static troops, foreign conscripts, or men with limited combat training. Unlike the Allies, the Germans could not rotate fresh troops into the front lines. Meanwhile, the Allies were unloading entire regiments, armoured brigades, artillery groups, and engineer battalions with clockwork regularity. For every unit the Germans lost, the Allies landed several more. Carrington falls, a critical Allied victory. On June 12th, the strategic town of Carrington fell to elements of the US 101st Airborne Division and supporting units. The capture of Carrington linked the American beaches of Utah and Omaha into a continuous front, eliminating a critical gap the Germans had hoped to exploit. The fall of Carrington had both strategic and psychological consequences. It solidified the American beachhead. It created a unified Allied front line stretching across Normandy. It demonstrated the inability of German paratroopers, once considered elite, to hold against sustained Allied assault. The German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, which had earned a fearsome reputation in earlier campaigns, broke under the pressure. Their commander, Friedrich von der Heydte, reported to higher headquarters, "My regiment no longer exists as a combat unit. The survivors are psychologically broken." This was a startling admission from one of the Wehrmacht's most respected airborne leaders, and it reflected a broader trend. Elite units that had once formed the backbone of German offensive power were being destroyed or rendered ineffective. The Michael Wittmann episode, a tactical success amid strategic collapse. On June 13th, one of the few German tactical successes in Normandy occurred at Villers-Bocage, led by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann, the famed Tiger tank commander. According to British military records, Wittmann's Tiger destroyed 13 to 14 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, 13 to 15 personnel carriers, all within approximately 15 minutes. This extraordinary feat was immediately seized upon by German propaganda as evidence that the Wehrmacht still possessed the capacity to deliver decisive blows. However, the broader context told a very different story. Wittmann's Tiger tank, damaged during the engagement, was difficult for German forces to repair or replace. Fuel, spare parts, and replacement tanks were all in critically short supply. The British, on the other hand, replaced their losses within hours. Fresh armoured units were already arriving from the beachheads. This imbalance illustrated a brutal truth. Individual tactical excellence could not compensate for overwhelming Allied industrial and logistical superiority. Wittmann himself, credited with 138 confirmed tank kills across different fronts, was killed on August 8th when his Tiger was destroyed. Accounts vary on whether the fatal shot came from British or Canadian forces, but the outcome remained the same. The Wehrmacht's most successful tank ace was eliminated by an enemy that could afford to lose 10 tanks for every Tiger destroyed. The fall of Cherbourg, another blow to German morale. On June 26th, the port city of Cherbourg, fortified over 4 years and defended by 21,000 German troops, fell after only 5 days of serious fighting. The city had been expected to hold for weeks or even months. Instead, the exhausted garrison suffered massive bombardment from land, sea, and air, and eventually surrendered. General-Lieutenant Karl Wilhelm von Schlieben, commander of Cherbourg's defences, had vowed to fight to the last bullet. But in post-war interrogation, he explained, resistance became meaningless against unlimited enemy resources. His statement captured the essence of the German predicament. No matter how bravely they fought, the Allies possessed resources that seemed inexhaustible. Every German strongpoint that fell revealed the structural weakness of a defensive system built on political illusions rather than realistic military assessments. Operation Cobra, the breaking point. By late July, German forces in Normandy were nearing total exhaustion. On July 25th, the Americans launched Operation Cobra, the offensive designed to break out of the Normandy bocage. The preparatory bombardment represented one of the most concentrated uses of air power in the European theatre. According to official U.S. Army Air Forces records, the operation began with 1,503 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, 550 fighter bombers dropping more than 4,100 tons of bombs across a narrow front only 7,000 yards wide and 2,500 yards deep. The effect on German forces was catastrophic. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the Wehrmacht's most elite formations, reported, "My division is annihilated. The psychological effect on the survivors is indescribable. They are no longer soldiers, but broken men." The bombing was so intense that it killed Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, the highest-ranking American officer killed in the European theatre, who had been observing the operation from what was assumed to be a safe position. If a senior American general was not safe from Allied firepower, what chance did German infantry or armoured units have? As July turned to August, the German situation in Normandy shifted from crisis to catastrophe. Operation Cobra had broken the stalemate. American forces, once trapped in the dense hedgerow country, now surged south and east with increasing momentum. The German front line, exhausted and hemorrhaging men and equipment, began to fracture. By early August, the Allies initiated a series of converging offensives designed to encircle the German 7th Army and elements of the 5th Panzer Army. The encirclement would become known as the Falaise Pocket, one of the most destructive entrapments of German forces in the Western Front. The German High Command was fully aware of the danger, yet powerless to prevent it. Allied air superiority prevented coordinated withdrawals. Every German movement by day risked annihilation from fighter bombers. Even night marches were hazardous, as Allied aircraft continuously patrolled with radar assistance. The trap closes between August 12th and 21st. The Allied armies, Canadian, British, American, and Polish, tightened the noose around German forces. Attempts to break out or reinforce the pocket failed repeatedly. What occurred inside the narrowing corridor soon became one of the most nightmarish scenes of the entire Western campaign. According to combined Allied intelligence and post-war German records, approximately 10,000 German soldiers were killed. Around 50,000 were taken prisoner. More than 300 tanks and armoured vehicles were destroyed. Over 2,500 trucks, cars, and transport vehicles were eliminated. German soldiers trapped inside described apocalyptic destruction. Roads clogged with wrecked vehicles, dead horses, and shattered equipment. Artillery shells rained down relentlessly. Allied aircraft strafed and bombed with near impunity. Columns of infantry attempting to escape were torn apart by machine gun fire. One German survivor later recalled, "It was not a battlefield. It was a slaughterhouse." Even senior officers understood the hopelessness of the situation. Panzer divisions that had once spearheaded German victories across France and the Soviet Union were reduced to little more than disorganized remnants. The Falaise Pocket marked the effective destruction of Germany's fighting strength in Normandy. The final numbers of the Normandy campaign. By the end of August 1944, the statistics told a story of overwhelming imbalance. German losses, June 6 to August 31, 1944, 320,000 total casualties, 30,000 killed, 80,000 wounded, 210,000 captured or missing, 2,300 tanks and armoured vehicles destroyed, 2,127 aircraft lost. These losses were irreplaceable. Germany simply lacked the industrial and logistical capacity to rebuild entire armies in the field. Allied losses in the same period: 29,672 casualties, killed, wounded or missing. Approximately 4,000 tanks lost, 4,111 aircraft lost. The crucial difference was this: Allied losses were replaced within days, while German losses were permanent. The industrial mathematics of defeat. General Lieutenant Heinrich Eberbach, who assumed command after Rommel was wounded, reported to OKW on August 1st. The enemy's material superiority is at least 20 to 1 in artillery, 10 to 1 in tanks, and absolute in aircraft. He replaces all losses within days. We cannot replace anything. General Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, later wrote in his memoir, "Normandy proved that courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy." Allied factories, especially those in the United States, supplied the invasion with a constant, inexhaustible flow of equipment. Ford's Willow Run factory produced a B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. US factories produced 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. Ammunition expenditure in one day at Normandy exceeded German production for an entire month. A single American infantry division consumed more supplies per day than an entire German corps. Germany simply could not match these numbers. The Wehrmacht was fighting a modern industrial war with insufficient manpower, dwindling fuel, inadequate logistics, and rapidly aging equipment. Rommel's final assessment. Before being severely wounded by Allied aircraft on July 17th, Field Marshal Rommel submitted his final written assessment to Hitler. His message, stripped of political language, was a stark admission of defeat. The troops are fighting heroically everywhere, but the unequal struggle is nearing its end. The enemy's overwhelming superiority in men and material is beginning to tell. I must beg you to draw the necessary conclusions without delay. Rommel, a national hero and the Wehrmacht's most respected commander, was telling Hitler plainly, Germany could no longer win. The Normandy campaign revealed the essential transformation of World War II, the triumph of industrialized warfare over traditional military doctrine. German soldiers, many of them veterans of lightning campaigns in Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, encountered an enemy unlike any they had faced before. The Western Allies, particularly the United States, had turned war into an industrial process, a system of mass production and logistical efficiency that Germany could not hope to counter. Psychological aftershocks among German survivors. The German soldiers who survived Normandy suffered profound psychological trauma. They had witnessed the complete contradiction of everything they had been taught. Propaganda had promised Allied weakness, yet they saw unstoppable strength. Training emphasized German superiority, yet they faced an enemy who outproduced, outsupplied, and outfought them. Ideology taught them that victory was destiny, yet defeat became undeniable. Hinrich Seele, the machine gunner of WN-62, lived the rest of his life haunted by June 6th. In his memoir, he wrote about meeting American D-Day veterans. We realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 rounds meant nothing against their endless replacements. Friedrich von der Heydte, the German paratroop commander who had fought valiantly on multiple fronts, later became a professor of international law. Reflecting on Normandy, he wrote, "The era of the warrior hero was over. War had become a matter of production and industry, and we had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with horses and outdated dreams." A complete ideological collapse. D-Day from the German perspective was not only a military defeat, it was an ideological collapse, a revelation of the falsehoods at the core of the Nazi worldview. German soldiers discovered the Western democracies were neither weak nor divided. American industry possessed a capability beyond German comprehension. Allied unity, planning, logistics, and technology were superior in every measurable way. Courage, discipline, and training, while admirable, were no longer enough. Modern warfare belonged to nations that could outproduce their enemies, not outmarch them. The final lesson of Normandy, Hinrich Seele began June 6th with absolute confidence. By nightfall, he was surrounded by empty shell casings, facing a battlefield filled with supplies, vehicles, and reinforcements that simply did not stop coming. His experience mirrored the entire German tragedy in Normandy. Tactical skill drowned in strategic impossibility. The German defenders fought with courage, precision, and determination, but the Allies brought something infinitely more decisive: unlimited industrial power. Attempting to stop the Allied invasion, the German forces were trying to hold back something that resembled a force of nature. They fought until their barrels overheated, until their ammunition was exhausted, until their defensive lines were obliterated. But the Allied armies kept coming. The mathematics of modern war had rendered German bravery irrelevant. In the end, Normandy taught history's most unforgiving lesson. In an age of industrial warfare, nations that cannot match their enemy's production are doomed to defeat, regardless of the courage or skill of their soldiers. The German defenders of Normandy began June 6th as warriors of the Third Reich. They ended it as witnesses to the overwhelming power of the arsenal of democracy. Their defeat was not just military, it was total. A crushing demonstration that ideology, propaganda, and battlefield experience meant nothing against the sheer scale of industrial might brought ashore on the beaches of France. The invasion they had sworn to throw back into the sea instead swept them away, along with the last illusions of German victory.